I'm thinking about metaphors, and I'm thinking about religion, and I'm thinking about consciousness, creativity, social change, yeah, those kind of ideas really. And one of the things I'm thinking about here is to do, I started out thinking about religion actually, and Martin Buber. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find my way back there, but what I'm thinking about specifically is to do with certain metaphors and poetic ways of understanding a number of things, the ones I've just cited. Poetic ways of understanding what consciousness is, and I think we have to understand it poetically since it's not something we can engage with directly. Consciousness, creativity, as I say, large-scale social change, and what we might call spiritual or religious ambitions, perhaps, something like that. Baby, come here, love. Come here. Come here. Good girl. Good. And what I'm thinking about there is in relation to the two metaphors which I think populate those different phenomena. One is to do with convergence and coming together, and the other is to do with light. Certainly in terms of, well, just basic consciousness, really, just basic awareness. A lot of the language about consciousness and awareness is, and this is not just vernacular, this is in the literature as well, in the scientific literature, is to do with something like coming together. So a part of the difficulties of understanding consciousness within neuroscience is what's called the binding problem. How can all these different stimuli coming in through all these different sensory modalities and all of the internal monitoring that's going on, how can that somehow lead to this well, how can it, in the big picture, how can it lead to this overall apparently singular, apparently unified experience of being alive and awake, which we all have? You know, there's lots of bazillions of things coming at me now through my eyes, through my ears, through my other sensory organs, and all of this is somehow turning itself into a single composition, a single orchestral, compositional, choreographic piece of multimedia artwork, if you like, that I seem to be finding myself walking around in the whole time. Singular. So that's part of the binding problem. And on a smaller scale, you know, just how can this multitude of tiny little entities on this object across the canal here from, how can I unproblematically turn that buzzing cloud of atoms, as Chopra puts it, into a tree? There's again a binding problem there. So there's something about binding, there's something about convergence in the very act of being alive and awake. And experientially, it's hard not to think of that as a coming together in an illuminated space. And not just because I'm standing here beside a canal in Cheshire and it's daylight, so I am standing in an illuminated space. It's almost irresistible to think of consciousness itself as a kind of illuminated space, as differentiated from the darkness of unconsciousness and the deeper darkness of death. So this is, I think, there's a really strong metaphor going on there. But that's also exactly the same metaphors that you find in creativity. A lot of the literature about creativity, you know, Arthur Koestler's famous book On the Act of Creation is an example of this. Talks about convergence. He doesn't use those terms. He uses, I think the word he uses, by association, the coming together of different matrices of ideas, and the emergence of a new synthesis out of this coming together of these different matrices. But you find it across all of the literature on creativity, and not just, you know, academic literature, the kind of business-oriented, you know, how to think creatively kind of stuff, the self-help literature, self-development stuff on creativity, all uses this metaphor of coming together, and the idea of different sources of ideas meeting at a point where some new emergent entity can blossom in the world as a new created artifact or a theory or an invention or whatever it may be in artwork. And again, there's often light associated with that. A lot of the language of creativity, particularly individual creativity, it does also apply to collective, collaborative or impersonal creative processes as well, but certainly a lot of the language of personal creativity is the language of illumination. In that famous essay by Graham Wallis, The Art of Thought, from back in the 1920s, he identifies this moment within creation and creative processes, which he calls illumination. The moment when the lights go on, the moment when the light bulb goes on above your head, the moment when this idea just dawns on you, like the sun just cresting the horizon on your thought and revealing this new idea to you. So again, the language is all around illumination and light and convergence and coming together. On a larger scale, I think you find that particularly in the idea of the Enlightenment, that period of Western history when a lot of ideas seemed to come together simultaneously, or it was felt that ideas were coming together. It was felt that there could be, if not unified, then at least partially unified understandings of how the world works. And that's accompanied by a sense of moving out of the dark, quite literally out of the dark age, not literally, but quite coherently out of a period of the dark ages, out of a period of superstition, out of a period where everything was kind of occulted and occluded by the shadows of superstition. Science appears at that moment like a candle in the darkness, as what's he called? The guy who wrote Cosmos, as he puts it, and then it turns into this full illumination of the Enlightenment. But you also find it in this idea of spiritual enlightenment as well, and religion. This is the bit that I feel least confident about, I have to say. So I'm not absolutely sure what I mean by that. But again, there's a sense of things coming together to a moment of unity, to a oneness, to a cessation of all dualisms and dualities, to a melding of mind with mind and of subject with object, and there'd be no differentiation. And we enter not so much the ground of all being, but the total illumination of all being. That's kind of the idea of it, I think. So I just think it's interesting that you find across all these different levels and all these different scales the same metaphors playing out, to do with illumination, to do with convergence and coming together. I don't know what the significance of that is. Maybe they are genuinely related, or maybe they just feel related because they're using the same metaphorical structure to talk about them. But you do often find those ideas put together, that spiritual enlightenment is often associated with consciousness, or consciousness is associated with creativity, or creativity is associated with neuroscience. All these things kind of seem to play out, and maybe they are genuinely the same thing, or genuinely scalar properties of the same phenomena. Or maybe they're just different verses in the same poem.